Big news came out at the Global Disarmament Conference in Geneva earlier this month. The U.S. Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security, Thomas DiNanno, accused China of conducting nuclear tests secretly in 2020. Take a look.
I can reveal that the U.S. government is aware that China has conducted nuclear explosive tests, including preparing for tests with designated yields in the hundreds of tons. The PLA sought to conceal testing by obfuscating the nuclear explosions because it recognized these tests violate test ban commitments. China has used decoupling, a method to decrease the effectiveness of seismic monitoring to hide their activities from the world. China conducted one such yield-producing nuclear test on June 22nd of 2020.
How credible is the U.S. claim of China's 2020 secret nuclear test? And why reveal it now in 2026? Moreover, Trump is pushing for trilateral nuclear talk with Russia and China. Why is China refusing to participate? Lastly, with nuclear weapon treaty now expired, what is going to be the impact on global stability amid the new nuclear arms race? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I am Wen-Ti. To unpack these issues and more, I am joined by two very distinguished guests today. We have Kish Liao, Atlantic Council's Global China Hub Associate Director, and Tristan Tang, non-resident Vesey Fellow at Pacific Forum. A great welcome to the show, Kish and Tristan. Allegation of China's secret nuclear test. After Trump alleged that the country was among those to have conducted tests unknown to the public, China has denied testing nuclear weapons. Take a look.
作为安理会常任理事国和负责任的核武器国家，中国始终坚持走和平发展道路，奉行不首先使用核武器的政策，坚持自卫防御的核战略，恪守暂停核试验的承诺。
Tristan, how credible do you think this allegation is that China secretly tested this nuclear test in 2020, and why unveil it only now in 2026?
I think this claim is, of course, possible, but still has some mixed response. Of course, a U.S. official openly declared in the international conference, so they must have their own proof. But on the other hand, as Al Jazeera has mentioned, an international monitor, that there seems to no evidence to support this claim. And as for why this happened in 2026, I would say the most important thing, of course, is New START, which just ended U.S. and Russia bilateral nuclear arm control treaty. So, and judging from the U.S. Undersecretary's wording that he put this China information, this China nuclear testing information within the context of the New START treaty. So I would say these two things are linked.
Thank you for that. And I think, Kish, one aspect of the credibility of this allegation is about the actual military necessity of it. So when it comes to this kind of nuclear test, like, why couldn't China just run a simulation on a computer or something? Is there a need to actually physically test it?
Now, these tests have three different sorts of, uses. The first one is to verify your stockpile's integrity, because these things, degrade and they radiate, and sometimes they transform into something else, especially for plutonium, which is generally used for fusion bombs, right? Thermonuclear bombs. We still don't know a lot about how they actually degrade and how fast they degrade. The third kind that's the most controversial one is you want to test some of your geometries, because it's actually much, much harder to make smaller nuclear bombs than larger ones, right? So the state of the art, if we saw like the yield, illustration here, is around the 80s and 90s. And if you can see like around 1,000 kilograms, that's where most of the smaller nuclear bombs tend to be, because that's sort of like the payload for most of the weapons we used during that time. Like some of the Tomahawks, some of the other missiles, smaller tactical nukes. And China would want to do that for themselves, right? Because they are catching up. Like a lot of this testing is actually much easier than doing the actual science. It obviates the need to actually do like super complicated, calculation, because I know once I test the explosion how it's going to look like.
You know it works or not, right? Once you actually put it to the test.
Yeah.
All right. But incidentally, Kish, you talk about the trend towards making more miniaturized equipment in that sense. You talk about how it's tougher to make smaller bombs than it is to make bigger bombs. But then what would be the utility of smaller bombs?
So several ones, right? Smaller bombs allows you to have a more flexible response. China has very few nuclear devices before presently when they start building up. So what that translates into is either you use it or not, right? There's almost no flexibility. If an adversary like the US were to hit, let's say, Hainan with a smaller nuclear bomb, do you just go all out? Or do you want to basically wait till they actually threaten Beijing or more important targets? But also, we have to consider China's theory for war control, right? Most of the time when we talk about war control, we're thinking about ending the war. We're talking about preventing war from happening. But in Chinese, strategic thinking, war control is more about how to use coercive power to get what the country needs, what the party wants, without actually, using force. Now, nuclear is arguably an important part of that. I want to add one more if we have time.
Yes, of course.
Is that for the U.S., right? China has actually accused the U.S. of having aggressive nuclear policies. What they meant was when the U.S. declared their no first use policy, it was very specific. It was against countries that does not have nuclear weapons. China always say that, well, this means you're going to use it against me at some point. But a lot of the nuclear, experts in the area, especially on the policy side, would characterize China's own no first use policy as well-intentioned, but the hole in their no first use policy, basically like the exceptions, which includes if you strike my power plants, if you strike important targets, it doesn't matter whether you go nuclear, I'm gonna nuke you. They would describe China's NFU as well-intentioned, but insincere. There's no credibility in their NFU.
NFU means no first use, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So coming back to the secret nuclear test here, Tristan, one of the claims U.S. made was that China used a decoupling tactic in large underground cavities in order to hide seismic signals so they wouldn't be detected. What is decoupling?
Yeah, so put it simply, basically it's making the cushion and decrease or to hide the seismic wave that's created by the testing. So it basically means that the remote sensor that US or other country has would have more limited opportunity or chances to really detect the seismic wave. So it's basically to hide the testing from the other countries.
Right, to avoid detection, that is, right, to keep it secret. Interesting. Oh, yes, Kish, you have something to add?
Yes, and I will add basically for our viewers that the test ban office, right? The Comprehensive Test Ban Office has declared that they did some seismic analysis and they found no evidence of such a test. But it behooves us to understand that all the IMS data, the International Monitoring Station seismic data, are supposedly open to the public, and so are their methodologies. What that means is if I'm actually going out of my way to basically hide the fact of what I'm doing, I know exactly what I'm up against. Right? So there are ways to basically, obfuscate these data. And furthermore, IMS actually stopped releasing the public data since there was an open source researcher collate all these data and try to basically establish North Korean nuclear tests yield, and the project got classified.
So still some very closely guarded information right there when it comes to nuclears. So I want to talk about one other topic, and that is the New START Treaty. And long before the 2009 New START Treaty for nuclear disarmament expired, very recently on February 5th this year, after it expired, Trump had already signaled his intention to resume nuclear testing anyway. A New York Times report published after New START Treaty's expiration also noted that in the post-New START era, the U.S. plans to increase nuclear deployments and restart nuclear trials. Here's what Trump said back in last October. Take a look.
We have more nuclear weapons than anybody. We don't do testing. We've halted it many years ago. But with others doing testing, I think it's appropriate that we do also.
I'm wondering, Tristan, why do you think Trump was not interested in extending the New START Treaty for nuclear control. By the way, what is New START Treaty anyway, and can you explain why Trump wouldn't want to extend it?
So the New START Treaty is signed in 2010, and back then China is still, of course, the Chinese economy is booming, but the Chinese military power is still very limited compared to Russia and compared to the United States. So back in 2010, that the New START Treaty include basically is to limit both U.S. and Russia on their warheads, about 1,550 deployed warheads and 700 deployed vehicles, including ICBMs and bombers. So this type of limitation would let the U.S. and Russia to know their limits and to have some trust mechanisms between them to not further escalate or to view other sides' behavior as risk. But as the U.S. government has reiterated many times that because the Chinese has started to boost their nuclear power, and the New START Treaty is no longer applicable to U.S.
So after New START Treaty expired, then now there seems to be no effective nuclear arms control framework in place. Kish, what do you think that will mean for the world's nuclear stability?
So we have to make it clear, like, what Trump was meant when he said, like, U.S. wants to resume testing. Of course, like, there's no exact wording for this, but a lot of the people in the nuclear community are thinking what this meant was what we talked earlier about hydronuclear testing. Very small yield, which is enough for you to do a lot of things that we just talked about, verifying your own stockpile, do all the radiation testing you need, but not enough to actually make new weapons. And because that's the thing, the U.S. has no need to make new weapons. You have dialable, tactical nuclear weapons anywhere from yield for 5 kiloton below, which is the congressional definition for tactical nuclear weapons. But in terms of unlimited arms race, I think that's a little bit overblown because this thing has always been dynamic. If we look back toward the Eisenhower era, the point of nuclear arms race at the very beginning was actually an attempt to transition from conventional arms race because it was costing too much. Eisenhower's new look was basically to transform the conventional forces into a nuclear one so we could spend less money. Everybody has that problem.
Are you saying it's cheaper to compete with nuclear arms race than with conventional arms race?
Ironically, that was the case in the 50s and 60s, yes.
Interesting. Tristan, I think one other important player, of course, to this whole equation is Russia. We know that Russia did also let New START Treaty expire, of course, but now Russia has also expressed interest in pursuing strategic stability talks with the U.S. What do you think Russia is thinking?
I would say Russia still, at some level, still expects the New START to continue, because as Kit just mentioned, that it is economic, plausible to have this kind of treaty to make sure that both U.S. and Russia can spend less or spend reasonable amounts of resource on the nuclear, and then can put the other resources into other conventional weapons or even economy or social issues. So I would say that Russia extends still hope the New START, or without the form of New START, but carry out the limitation between U.S. and Russia.
Interesting. One common thing I hear is that nuclear arms competition is almost military competition on the cheap, which is somewhat ironic, as both of you have pointed out earlier. I want to move to what happens now that New START is over, now that we're in the post-New START era. U.S. President Trump has also called for a new trilateral framework, not just U.S.-Russia now, but U.S.-Russia-China, a new trilateral framework for new nuclear arms control negotiation involving both Russia and China. Indeed, American Secretary of State Marco Rubio said at the press conference in February that, quote, in order to have true arms control in the 21st century, it is impossible to do something that doesn't include China because of China's vast and rapidly growing stockpile. And yet, Beijing still firmly refuses to engage in such talks. Indeed, if you listen to China's ambassador for Disarmament affairs, Shen Jian, he released a statement in October 17, 2025. He said, China's nuclear forces is by no means on the same level with those of the US and Russia. Our nuclear policy and strategic security environment are also completely different. It is neither reasonable nor realistic to expect China to join a so-called trilateral nuclear arms control negotiation. So I want to ask Kish, China still doesn't want to engage in such nuclear arms control talks. Why wouldn't it?
So China has been consistently against any sort of nuclear talks. And a lot of the times, for the past few years or to a decade, people kept thinking, is it because China just don't get it? Like they don't get the message, or they misunderstood like the point of an arms control? But no, because the US has tried many times through many different channels, both military and civilian, try to talk to China about this. And China made their position very clear. We understand what you're talking about. We are not interested. And we are not telling you why we are not interested. And so we can make a few educated guesses, right? Speculations. Because if we talk about nuclear arms control, mostly we're talking about deterrence. Now, deterrence is a mind game more than anything else. So it's about what makes sense for US, what makes sense for China, what makes sense for Russia. What scares you? What keeps you up at night? You know? So for China, what keeps China up at night? Military targets? Probably, somewhat, but more leadership, right? Control of the military, right? So from China's perspective, I don't have enough nuclear weapons to achieve the effect that I want to stop the US from doing what they want to do with my leadership. And that's some of the stuff they talked about when they talk about nuclear counterbalance, right? Why do I need tactical nuclear weapons? Why do I want to put nuclear warheads on hypersonics? Why do I want to make it hard for you to basically take out my command and control? Keep in mind, China intentionally mingle their NC3, their nuclear command control, and their conventional one. It's almost as if they're saying, well, come, and if you dare to hit me, because, the results might be something you don't want to bear. So we have to keep in mind, China's strategic culture is very, very different from, the Cold War nuclear arms race and the logic that we developed during that time.
Kish, we look forward to you writing that book on China's nuclear strategy. That'll be quite an interesting comparison from Thomas Schelling and others.
Oh, there's so many other experts better than me, so.
Thank you. That humility is admirable. And I want to come to Tristan for my next question about regional reaction to this. So other countries, of course, are watching this. And Tristan, how do you think that China's refusal to restrain its nuclear arms program is raising concern among Indo-Pacific partners at this moment, like Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, for example? And how do you think these partner countries will react?
So as we discussed, the nuclear arms race between China and the US, or even include Russia, is among these three major nuclear power. So, of course, PRC or POA to have more nuclear weapons or nuclear power is to deter the United States or even to go against the United States. So if China's nuclear weapons keep on increasing and have more tactical nuclear weapons, it would definitely make the U.S. military, when they maneuver in the Western Pacific, to be more cautious, or even somehow retreat from the first island chain back to the second island chain, and so on and so forth. So it would definitely make the regional actors such as Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, or even Philippines, to be more willing to work with each other in case that the United States someday, because Chinese military conventional one or nuclear one keep on pushing out the U.S. forces, and then the regional actors and all countries will need to help each other.
Do you think this is going to prompt these Indo-Pacific partners into either, double down in asking for more certain and more robust American protection? Or is it going to prompt them into thinking about perhaps developing their own nuclear deterrent, for example?
I think it is possible in both ways. But the most important thing is that the riskier situation is not caused by the U.S. is not willing to commit, but because the Chinese national power and the military might keep on going up. So this is the real factor behind this. And so if these factors keep on happening, no matter what, no matter it is the regional countries want to develop their own nuclear weapons, or to ask for more U.S. commitment, they still need to boost their cooperation between each other.
And Kish, I guess to connect it to that question also is, let's say hypothetically, if these Indo-Pacific partners, they end up working towards developing their own nuclear deterrent, and they try to build their own sovereign defense industrial base. At that point, how do you think that trend will affect their relations with the U.S. and the alliance or partnership?
Thank you, Wen-Ti. And Tristan's right? China's development of nuclear weapons, additional nuclear weapons, I should say, like the build-up warheads, definitely has a destabilizing effect on the region, right? And we got to talk about this from different countries. South Korea has been yelling that they want nuclear warheads forever. They want nuclear weapons on the peninsula. They want it within their hands. They've developed delivery vehicles that, the payload section looks exactly like what you need to put a nuclear payload in. So they did everything but having nuclear weapons. But from an IR perspective, we are really talking about the loss of credibility in terms of extended deterrence vis-a-vis alliance entrapment, right? Traditionally, Japan and South Korea relies on U.S. for nuclear umbrella. That means U.S. has leverage to control escalation, to control what the region looks like when an adversary like China or Russia were to provoke them, or North Korea and South Korea's example. But since the NSS comes out, we understand the U.S. wants regional partners to take their part. And South Korea is more than happy to do that as long as they have nuclear weapons, right? So having said that, if South Korea and Japan were to have their own nuclear weapons, they could definitely escape this basically like extended deterrence trap. But that also brings up another question, right? At that point, they are free to think independently. And
Indeed,
what does that do to U.S. entrapment?
Yeah, I mean, when they have security needs from the U.S., I guess that need create dependency, which in turn give U.S. leverage in that sense. And it also works the other way around, right? If they don't need U.S. for security, then U.S. leverage over them, perhaps the tightness of the connections might have no new risk factors thrown into it in that sense. I want to come to Tristan for my next question, which is related to this notion of unrestrained military competition. And that is, let's say if we really enter into an era of unrestrained arms race with U.S., with China, Russia, many other actors. If we ever get to that point, do you think America's defense industrial base at the moment and their budget for defense can keep up in a more sustained long-term basis with that competition with China?
The United States and the U.S. government is definitely, able to bring up the resilience of the industrial base. Just take every major war in the past, especially the Second World War, that if the United States is willing to put up the mind and boost their defense industrial base, they would definitely be able to do so. The current situation of the U.S. military industrial base is because after the Cold War, there is no need for that kind of big amount of big level of industrial output, so they decrease their output capacity. But right now, the enemy come back, and even more enemy than before. So it would definitely bring up the need, and if the need went up, and the overall capacity would also went up.
Right, and briefly, Kish, last question on that. How do you think Taiwan and other regional partners can play a role in terms of the expanding broader U.S. and France defense industrial capacity?
So I want to pivot a little bit. I think Tristan's right. Industrial capacity is a shared problem between U.S. allies and partners. Taiwan is one of the partners. But, we are smarter. U.S. used to be smarter than this, right? You don't pit basically arrow against arrow and stone against stone. You try to find your adversary's weakness and pit your advantage against them. This is called net assessment, right? This is what we do when we come up with like the first, second, and third offset. So you try to do this thing called strategic asymmetry, right? This is what it is. And so we have to identify what U.S. and partners and allies are good at, And one of the critical questions here, on the other hand, and this should be like what we spend most of our efforts on, is that our current understanding for the Chinese Communist Party, for how the China system works, is still very much lacking, right? Every war game I've been to, every war game people talked about this, it all comes down to one thing. We need to know more on how the Chinese society operates and how the Chinese government, how their authority operates. Because ultimately, that's what they care about, right? That's what the Communist Party cares about, control. So how do you endanger that? How do you use your advantage to threaten that so, we could be safe?
On that note, I would like to thank you both, Tristan, Kish, for your insight today and for sharing your time with us. If you like our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today, and we'll see you next time.